Hello and welcome to CJC Adventures. Carl here, and today I'm going to do the filming locations to a long forgotten film which more recently in the last few years has become more popular and people are discovering it. I'm going to do the filming locations to the 1982 TV film Ghost in the Water. Now, Ghost in the Water was based on the 1973 novel of the same name by Edward Chitham, and this ghostly tale was only ever screened once on the UK television on BBC One at 4:40 p.m. on New Year's Eve in 1982, but disappeared into obscurity. It stars Judith Allchurch as Tess and Ian Stevens as David, in which Tess becomes almost possessed by the spirit of Abigail Parks after looking into the life of the unrested spirit after they discover she died innocent of all harm while they were taking on a school project. Now, most of that film was filmed here, right in the Black Country, and I'm going to show you the filming locations used for this 1982 long discovered, maybe forgotten tale. So, let's go. Now, the opening scenes of the film, in which Tess and David are in the churchyard at night in the rain, which is not a nice thing to do, searching for their school project, and the grave of Abigail Parks was filmed right here at St Andrew's Church in Netherton. Now, just a small amount of scenes were filmed around here, so let's go and find them. Now, in the scene, obviously it's very dark, but you can actually see that grave with the round shape to it. But it does look actually very different in the daylight. And if you think about that scene, it was obviously at night and it was raining, and it's hard to pinpoint, but this is one of the only real crosses. And if you look at some of those graves there, which are on a tilt, they can be seen in the shot. But you'll probably find some of the graves were placed there as a prop. Now, if you ever come to St Andrew's Church in Netherton, please do be aware that Abigail Parks' grave was fictional, and again, the grave would be a prop. It would be used completely for filming purposes and wouldn't really be at this gravesite at this church in Netherton. Now, in this scene we see Tess and David walking up a hill, and it looks a pretty steep hill, and Tess tells David about gorse, about how if you build on it or set fire to it, it'll still keep coming back. Now, that scene was filmed right here. Now, back in 1982 the landscape was slightly different, and if you look in that shot you can actually see a factory. Now, there are still factories down there, but they have changed a little bit, but the actual overgrowth of where David and Tess were walking up has actually grown over, as you can see, so you wouldn't probably walk the way that they walked in the film, but this is where they walked up, and Tess basically said about the gorse overtaking everything, doesn't matter what you do to it. Well, as you can see, that is gorse there. Now, it's not in flower at the moment, but you normally get yellow flowers, so there is real gorse bushes here. So, you know, that's good. But over in the distance, I mean, another thing that has changed, you can see the Merry Hill Centre. Now, the Merry Hill Centre wasn't there in 1982. It was just factories and industry. Now, as Tess and David walk away, we see a hill and we see one tree. This is the spot, but if you look, the trees have grown so much. Back in the day there was one tree, and I think it's the one on the far side. Now, all of this is basically in Netherton. This, as I say, it has changed, the landscape has changed as you would expect, but this is roughly where David and Tess would be walking away after having the conversation about the gorse. Now, Tess's house, where she lived and where all the scenes were done when her parents and she were going off on holiday, were actually filmed just there, where you can see that first bush. You can actually see that car outside, that silver car. It was the one just there, and to the right there was a H in the road, a road sign. Now you can just see in the road where that road sign used to be, and it was also where the mine collapsed in the garden. I imagine all the scenes for inside were also filmed here, along with anything else that they decided to put in the film for Tess's house. Now when they come out the door and drive off, you can actually see them pass a telegraph pole, and this would be the telegraph pole opposite Tess's house. Now when they drive away, Tess and her parents in their car, we see them drive down the road and round a right hand corner. Now that actual corner is that same one. Now the actual scene is a foggy day, because in Netherton it's very high up, and what tends to happen is you get a lot of fog, so that was obviously filmed during maybe the winter months, but that is the actual corner we see them go off in. Now there's no record of where they end up. It's somewhere by the seaside, but looking into research, there's no way you can find exactly where they went. They went to see a relative or a friend to get more information in the story of the film, but this is where they went off, and they rounded the corner and went off on their travels. Now the school that they use in the film is this one. Now today it's called the Link, but back in 1982 it was called the Hillcrest School. Now you can see that in one of the shots as David and Tess walk out of the school gates. You can actually see the sign. Now that was the actual real sign, it was really called that, but over the last few years it's changed the name to the Link Academy. Now the school has changed a little bit since 1982. New buildings have been added, and the one thing that still remains the same, where you can pinpoint where David and Tess were walking out of the school, is this wall. It has a diamond brick shape in the pattern of the bricks, and you can see that just as David and Tess are walking out of the school, they would have been walking away from this wall. We also see Tess and David walking up the road just here. Now not a lot has changed. You can see that building just there, that house in the shot, and you can see them walking up that hill. Now a lot of the scenes inside where we see the teacher and all the other pupils would have really been filmed inside here. Now I imagine that probably a lot of that school now has changed a lot. We see the staircase in the shot and the classrooms and a little bit of the library as well, so I imagine it's probably changed a little bit in there. Now we also see Tess and David crossing the road coming from the school, and when they cross the road you can just see that sign just there, just where Tess walks across the road, and it says Hill Street, just up the road from where she lives, and that is where she crossed. And when she walks up this road, we see her talking to David, and they say their goodbyes for the time being. We see that church in the distance. Now you can see that clearly. Nothing has really changed much here, and this is where that scene happened. Now the scene where we see David and Tess walking through Dudley Market would have been filmed right here. Now a lot of the places have changed in Dudley, especially the market, but it's always been in the same spot. It's been done up quite a bit. It was a very tight shot if you watch it, probably real market day going on. So yeah, this is Dudley Market where we see Tess and David walking through having a conversation. Now we've made it to Dudley Registry Office. Now the scene in which you see the men from the past, which is a dream sequence, they look to be in court and going over what may have happened to Abigail Parks. Well, the courtroom was actually situated here inside Dudley Registry Office. Now, how you can tell, the windows match up perfectly, and the rooms at the time would have been to a standard where it would have looked like a court. It has been modernised inside here, so I'm told, but this was where the dream sequence of the what looked to be a courthouse. This is where it was filmed at Dudley Registry Office. I've now made it to St Mark's Church in Dudley. It's just a stone's throw from Russell's Hall Hospital, and the front part of this church wasn't used in any scenes for the film, but the back part was used in quite a few notable scenes throughout the film. So let's go and take a look. Now, the scene in which Tess and David are walking along the hill was filmed just at the back of the church. Now, the landscape does look a lot different to what it used to look like. You can actually see those buildings on the top there in the distance. Now, in the film, they do actually look more closer together because the angle that they shoot them at are more to the right, making them look closer than they actually are. But you can actually tell because if you look at those buildings in the middle with the triangle roof, you can actually see those in the shot. So it's roughly around here where Tess and David would have walked to the church. Now, the next scene we see is at the back of the church, and where we see Tess and David having a conversation, and they walk straight through this gate. Now, in the film, the gate was still there. It's not there anymore, but if you line it up, you can actually see that gravestone to the left wall, just peeping over the top there. That is actually in the film. Now, you can see the church in the distance. Now, the only difference is, to the right of the church, the view is more obscured now because there's a big conifer tree growed way up. It probably was there in 1982, but since then it's grown and grown and never been really cut down, I imagine. But this is the actual gate that we see Tess and David walk through on their way up to the church to find the church records. In the next shot we see David and Tess walking up this steep incline up to the church. You can actually see that tree just there. That looks to be the same tree. It's grown up since then, obviously all those years ago, but this would be the hill that they would have both walked up. We then see both of them walk up here, and we see and hear David struggling a little bit running up the hill, and he says to Tess, "I'm shattered," and she says, "Keep going." So this was the section. You can actually see the shade of that tree there in the shot, but this was obviously where they would have said those words. This is also where the section part of the hill up to the church where we can see a wedding going on, and someone is very happy because of the wedding going on, but they would have walked across there. They would have been obviously extras for the film. I doubt very much that was a real wedding, but that is literally where they would have stood. We then see Tess stop in a bit of a shock, and she looks up and remembers the dream she had about and it all comes back to her about the actual funeral of Abigail Parks, and she looks up in shock. She would have stood right here looking up in disbelief, but of course it's just a flashback dream. Now, when we see the dream of Abigail Parks's funeral, the creepy men or undertakers would have walked right across here. Now, on the left in the shot we see a headstone. Now, that headstone wasn't really there. That is an actual prop, because if you look, I don't think anyone would be buried on a steep incline like that. That would have been to the left, the actual prop, what we see. But they would have been coming down this steep embankment and over to the church to quickly do the actual funeral. And you hear Mr. Parks, we assume Abigail's dad or father, should I say, and he's saying, "Go on, quickly, quickly." And they say, "Okay, Mr. Parks." Well, that was roughly and exactly to the left where they would have stood to do those dream sequence scenes. Now this is where one of those men would have stood carrying the coffin of Abigail Parks. You can see her actual name on the coffin. It would have actually been done here where the Mr. Parks was actually rushing them to do it. We then see another scene where Mr. Parks again is rushing them to dispose and get it done as quickly as possible, well, the funeral at least, and he's shouting at them, and he would have stood right about there while that scene was being done, that dream sequence. We then see one of the creepiest scenes of the film. Mr. Parks says, "Go away, yo, go away," in a very thick black country accent. Now he actually stood here and they did that scene right here. It was a close-up shot, and it would have been right here where he would have said those words. We then see Tess and David walk into the church. Here you can tell it was from here where they filmed that, because you can see these two crosses in the shot, both side by side, and they would be walking off into the church to find the parish records. Now these were the doors that we see both friends walk into. Now, like most days, it probably was a bit different in 1982 when the film was made. This church isn't open today, but it is a very nice church inside, and they did film the scene where they was talking to the vicar and he showed them some records, and accidentally Tess actually ripped one of the pages without the vicar knowing, because it was very fragile, as the vicar told her. But that was actually filmed right inside this church. We then see Tess and David heading back from the church and down the hill, and when they go down the hill you can see this cross on the left, and you can see this creepy grave with a figure leaning forward, and they walk past it to go on to their next destination and their next spot. I've now made it to Tividale Park. Now this is the scene where we see Tess walking up in the dark, and we see one of her school friends ride past her and grab her scarf, throw it onto the tunnel air shaft, and then ride down the hill. Now this would actually be the scene in which we saw Tess walking along, and one of her school friends actually steals her scarf. They would have gone right along here, along the top of this hill. It's an actual sports field on the top. We then see Tess standing there trying to retrieve her scarf, which has been thrown on there, and well, I would say her school friend just rides away down this hill just here, and she's looking up trying to retrieve it. We then see Tess grab some bricks from somewhere, no one knows where really, and place them up to try and retrieve her scarf, which has been thrown on top of the air shaft. Now the funny thing is, when Tess puts the bricks down here, she then puts a foot in a gap. There's a brick missing in the air shaft. She puts a foot in there and she would climb up to retrieve it, then she looks inside. Now, I don't know whether that brick was taken away and taken out for production purposes, or it was already missing when they made the film. Now, maybe they forgot to put it back, or was it always like this? It's something we'll never know. Now, this air shaft is one of the air shafts to Netherton Tunnel. It's a 2-mile long tunnel, and it goes, well, for 2 miles really. It's a very scary tunnel, but it's good to do it. But this is where that scene was filmed, where Tess retrieves the scarf, shall we say, just there, just on the top there. She climbs up, but honestly, it's a bit slippy. I wouldn't like to try it, to be honest. Now, this is the actual view that we see of Royce Bridge, where Abigail Parks drowned, supposedly. And in reality, it's not called Royce Bridge. It's called North Cosley Bridge, because this is overlooking Cosley Tunnel, which is never mentioned in the film, just that it's a tunnel. If you notice in the background, a lot of things have changed. A lot of the trees have grown up. A lot of everything else you see in the background in that shot. You can still see the power lines in the distance, they're still there. But apart from that, everything is covered up and does look a bit different. Apart from the bridge, of course. And there is a scene where we see Tess looking over to the bridge. This would be this sort of angle that we would sort of see the bridge in the darkness. Quite strange really, in daylight to night time. Another shot is where we see Tess walking across the bridge to meet David. She would have walked right across here from that angle. We then see Tess and David walking through the tunnel, and Tess mentions about when you're in a graveyard it's going to heaven, but this is more like the entrance to hell. It's not that bad really, Cosley Tunnel. It's a bit dark, a bit wet, but it's not too bad. But this is where they would have walked into the tunnel. Now, the one thing you might notice about that scene when you see Tess and David walking into the tunnel is the amount of dripping water the other side of the canal. Well, that scene was taken from that side of the canal, and if you look at it, it's still dripping today since 1982. Now, don't know where the water's coming from, but if it's been dripping that long, it must have done some damage somewhere. We then see both friends looking into the wall of the tunnel and finding a loose brick and finding a letter from Abigail Parks that she didn't die the way they thought she did, shall we say. And she wrote a letter, put it into a box, and Tess and David found it right here in the tunnel. Now, when Tess and David come out the tunnel, Tess noticed that the ghost of Abigail is on the bridge, and she would have been standing right about there towards the left. Now, if you noticed in those scenes, there's actually lamps on either side of the bridge. Now, I don't think those lamps were really there. I think they were just props for production, just to light up the actual bridge itself and make it a little bit more creepy with the smoke effects and fog effects and so on. Now, when Tess gives chase, you'll notice that Abigail runs, and she would have run down this pathway. It would have been less overgrown by then, and nowadays it's more overgrown. She would have run down this path, and shouting Abigail, but she just threw the ring into the canal. Now, while chasing Abigail, Tess falls into the canal, and that would have been right here, and David got her out there. Now the final scene sees David rescue Tess from the canal, and she says her mum's going to kill her because of getting wet, and it's night time and the story's over, and Abigail Parks is at rest, shall we say, and off they go into the night. The credits roll, and that's the end of Ghost in the Water. I hope you've enjoyed this filming location. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe. Click on the subscribe icon, then the bell. You'll be notified when each video is uploaded, and please share with a friend or a relative or anyone else. Until next time, goodbye for now, and thanks for watching.